Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where in today's project we're going to be playing with a saw blade. But we're not going to be using this saw blade to cut wood. I don't really need this saw blade to cut wood. I want to take this saw blade and I want to turn it into some ulu knives. Okay? Now, this is a very nice material that's easy and accessible for a lot of people to find and work. You can get these old saw blades at flea markets and yard sales for $1 or $2 on the regular, right? This is not a real uncommon or hard to source starting material for a project. It's a good thickness for most realistic use knife blades, and most of them are very high quality material. Now there's two materials you're usually going to find these out of. One is the high nickel series of steels, right? This is your L6 and 15N20. And they're not going to really tell you what they are. There's some clues as you go along. This one does say that it has nickel in it, right? So I know that this one is one of those two. Or a proprietary derivative thereof. The ones that have their own teeth cut right into the blade are usually high nickel. Okay. Now the saw blades that have a carbide tooth silver soldered onto the blade are usually 1095 or something similar. But either way, both of those are very good steels for making something like a little skinning blade or a little carving knife. Okay, they're both very good. They will both respond well to a standard oil quench heat treat protocol. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut this up, and before cutting it up we have to take the temper out of it. I'll show you how to do that with a campfire. And then we're going to cut it up, we're going to talk about cutting pattern, and we're going to make a couple of little ulu blades. But as I was sketching how I wanted to cut this up, I was thinking your typical ulu is basically a pie wedge. Okay? So if I take this blade and just cut it into pie wedges, of course you can do that, but I'm not going to get great utilization out of the material, because if you think about this, right here's your cutting edge. That's for your, skinning and herb chopping or leathercraft, whatever, however you're going to use it. But there's a whole lot of space of metal here that then isn't having anything done with it. That could be other blades. So we have a modified pie wedge. And cutting this into an asymmetrical form means that I can also get these little small ulu blades out of it. Okay? So instead of getting one simple ulu blade, I can get two out of the same spot. And I was able to get these two that we finish on this video, 3 of these, an extra small one, and the pie wedge, all out of one blade. Okay? So from one saw blade, we're getting 7 blanks. Okay? Now, this video would take an eternity to both produce and watch if I went and finished all 7 of these blanks. So I finished 2 of them as an example, and I really like how these little blades came out. They're just a perfect little skinner, or little piece for cutting leather. Okay, they're just a perfect little fit in your hand blade, and these are going to be part of another future upcoming project, so watch for that. And then these are a more typical kitchen ulu. So they will get turned into stuff, and we still have a blade left over for more stuff. And if you are so inclined, if you watch this video and you like this project, you're like, I would like to do that, but I don't know if I can replicate those patterns. We have a tracing. We have the pie wedge, and it is important to have the pie wedge for cutting strategy, because if you're cutting this out with a hand hacksaw, you have to get into the blade somehow. Right? So that's that first cut. That lets you get that first cut in that exposes the middle of the blade and lets you do the rest of the cutting. And then we have 2 variations on the theme of the small ulu and 2 variations on the theme of the asymmetrical ulu. So if you would like to take one saw blade and get 7 kitchen knife blanks out of it, this is available on our Patreon. Now, our Patreon is very important. We're so grateful for everybody that's there because this is an unsponsored channel, and we would prefer, if possible, to keep it unsponsored so that we can maintain our independence. But that does depend on folks coming over and helping us with materials and making it possible to travel, find stuff, get stuff, do the work that we're doing, and teach these things back out to you. And for rewards, everybody who joins the Patreon gets, at any of the paid tiers, even the $1 a month, gets all of the plans, patterns, and historical archives for free. These are available as a one-time purchase if you want to come and help out that way. But if you join the Patreon, all of this stuff, the whole repository, is infinitely available to you at any of the paid tiers. So, hope to see you there, and let's dig into the project. Before we get into the Ulu Knife project itself, I want to talk a little bit about material selection. There are a lot of recycled materials that you can find very cheaply and very readily out there for this project. And a lot of thin sheet steels that we can use and approach this primarily as a stock removal knife making project. So we don't have to do a ton of forging. If you want a slightly deeper dive into what we're going to do, we recently did a Forging Without a Forge video where we do one step further, link at the top of the screen, and do some bending work with our stock material. There's a whole series on forging Makatagans from scratch in a proper forge where we use hay rake tine as the starting material and completely reforge it. I'll put that link in the end screen if you want to see either of those. But these saw blades are very readily available and a very good material for this sort of project. Now, this is one of the recycled steels where you don't know exactly what you're getting. But most of these are either one of the high nickel steels, and the 2 most common high nickel steels are L6 and 15N20. And 1095 is also very common. 1095 tends to be what's used most in blades that have a tooth welded on. So if you're looking at a blade that has a carbide tooth welded on to the ends, you're probably looking at 1095, which is a perfectly good steel for this project. The blades that don't have a tooth welded on can still be 1095, or they might be one of the nickel steels. And the larger the blade, the more likely it is to be one of the nickel steels. The reason is because the nickel content increases the toughness and helps prevent the blade from warping in use. Okay? So the smaller the diameter, the more likely it is to be 1095. The larger the diameter, the more likely it is to be L6 or 15N20. This one has written right on it, chrome, nickel, moly steel. So that is one of the high nickel steels. I don't know, I'm not sure exactly which one. They don't say exactly which one, but we know it's a high nickel steel. These are coveted for folks that are doing pattern welded steel projects because it gets shiny and has a good color contrast with 1095 when you're stacking and welding. Okay? This one does not say, and for this project, we don't really care. I have a series of videos on working with recycled steels and basic metallurgy for beginning blacksmiths. Link at the top of the screen to the basic metallurgy video, and then the end screens will take you through the rest. But for this, mystery meat is okay, because if this blade does not have a tooth welded on, we know it's going to be a good edge holding steel. And all of the steels that they use for these will respond very well to an oil quench. Okay? That's all we need to know for this project. For making an ulu, that's enough information. Okay? So I am going to use the blade, which is the most mysterious mystery meat. And I'm going to save this one since I know it's a nickel steel in case I want that for a project where I specifically want a nickel steel. For this, I don't care. So I'm going to use this one. I think I got these for like 50 cents or $1. Okay? So you can find these very readily. Now, in order to form this and to be able to cut it and file it easily, we need to take the temper out. So behind me I have a fire. And I built this fire from chunky pieces with some other wood in the middle and let it burn down to coals. Now, I want to re-enliven these coals a little bit, so I'm going to put a bit more wood on there, which has a little extra fuel. There's some small pieces. And then I'm going to put this blade on these chunky bits so that it's up off of the coals and not smothering them. Then on top of that, we're going to relay the fire. And again, this fuel on top I actually want to catch, so I'm going to care about airflow. And that's going to make an oven, and we're just going to roast that saw blade. We don't really care what temperature it gets to. It doesn't need to get to critical temperature. It just needs to get hot enough to take the temper out so I can go into it with a hacksaw. So I'm going to let this burn until that blade is re-exposed and I can pull it out. And then we will look at reducing this to shapes appropriate for ulu knives. I left this sit on the hot coals overnight to get it as close to fully annealed as possible. And it's interesting, it got hot because it sagged under its own weight and warped, okay, just in the fire. Since I had it set up there, it just slumped under its own weight. So, proof that you don't have to have something melting in order to deform it, right? It just slumped in just with the heat of a campfire. Now, that's fine. I did kind of put it on a wood block and try to tap it on the back a little bit with a hammer, and it wasn't budging. I don't want to overstress it and produce little stress fractures. So what I'm going to do is cut it out and then take the individual pieces and straighten them. Probably I'll be able to straighten the individual pieces just by clamping them in a vise, and that'll be the end of it. If I need to do a little heat, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So to cut this into ulu knives, the simplest, easiest, and most often done is to cut it into quarters, and then you get just a piece of pie, being your ulu knife blade, stick it in a handle that way, and there's your tool. Okay? Totally tradish. Totally tradish. And if I do that, I will get 4 nice blades out of this saw blade. And absolutely you can do that. If that's the style of kitchen ulu knife that you want, do that. Okay? But I'm thinking about these in terms of how much can I get out of this piece of steel. And I'm thinking about the eventual tool use possibly being something I carry around in a backpack while I'm out hunting or doing bushcraft or some sort of random thing like that. So I'm looking at this and thinking, from the perspective of being in a backpack, this is a lot of wasted weight. Most of this steel is doing absolutely nothing for me other than being heavy in my backpack. Okay? So I don't need that. And because it's doing nothing for me, it could possibly be put to use to make some other tools out of this blade. So I started playing with some ideas, like how many of these could I cut one of these? Could I cut one of these sides in half and maybe make 2 smaller ones? And is that enough? Well, that's enough for some things. But then I was also thinking there's a lot of asymmetrical ulu knives out there, both in ancient time when they're being made out of slate or copper, and where often you'll have a kind of a blade shaped like that and the handle at one end, right? So the tip sticks way forward of the handle. And I've also seen these being used by northern native people for sewing, because you have a lot of little corners that you can get in and cut up leather and furs and stuff like that. So I was interested in playing with this idea. And when I cut this out and got this little piece, well, that is a perfect little skinning blade. Okay? Right? Taking the skin off a deer. So, I started fiddling with this, putting it back on here. And if I'm a little bit more creative and not strictly limited to this original pie-shaped piece that I was playing with to make these patterns, I can narrow this a little bit and then take that up to here. Then I can fit one of these in. Okay, before I move over to the next larger blade. So by being just a little bit more creative about how we lay this out, we can get more out of it. And I'm hoping to get 8 complete blades out of this one circular saw. Okay? Now, cutting these out, it is all the way soft. I did test it with a file. Cutting these out, you can do this with a hand hacksaw. You could do it with a power hacksaw. You can work on this with a jeweler's saw to get around some of the tight curves. You can work on this with like a Dremel tool cutoff wheel. I'm not sure what combination of those tools I'm going to use to get all of this cut out, but I know I'm going to have to be a bit creative because these are some really tight turns to be turning in metal. So this is going to be a function of lay it all out with marker, cut the largest pieces so I can just break it down into the smallest pieces possible and start fiddling with it and cutting around those turns. And that's not going to be a short project. First half of the blade is cut out. Now, it just took a little bit of fiddling, getting everything right. To take all of the teeth out, I just took a vise, put the tooth in the vise, and then bent it back and forth 2 or 3 times, and they snapped right off. And doing that is a whole lot easier than cutting all of those off with a hacksaw. The edge we will then just file off, right, with a nice coarse file. This cut with a hacksaw, the best tool that I found, I tinkered with a couple different things. The best tool I found for the straight lines was just a hacksaw. And then here on this inside curves are the worst. They just are. But here on this inside curve, I could only cut a little bit, and then I just snap the tab off, and then only cut a little bit and snap the tab off, and then here I cut down from both sides. And then they're the same. And that will be repeated along this curve, right? I'll cut into there, and then snap the tab off, and then cut into there, and then snap the tab off, and then cut into there, snap the tab off. And you can just kind of chew your way around like that. Now, the really tricky part was taking this little skinning form. Isn't that just a nice little skinning knife right there? And it kind of looks like a shoe. I'm calling it the Shulu. But this inside curve where you want it to come out nice was the most difficult part of this whole project. And if you can see the little holes there, I took a small drill bit and just drilled out to perforate that line. And then again, I put the vise, the corner of the vise right there where my thumb is, and then twisted this until it just ripped down that perforated line. And that worked quite nicely. So I was only able to get 3 pairs of ulu and shulu, and then I just cut out the wedge, and this will be a more typical straight triangular ulu form. So this also allowed me to get in with a straight cut in order to get access to some of these other places. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out these last 4, and then we'll talk a little bit about truing them up and finishing. And like magic, they're all cut out. Now, they do vary a little bit in size, and that's totally fine. There's no right or wrong size to make these. They are what you want, what your material allows, and I haven't even measured the blades to see exactly what they are. So the next thing is just to take some large files, square all the edges or round all the edges, and file all of the teeth nice and get them to a nice finished shape. Now, we have smoothed and sanded all of the edges on these, so that was a combination of a little bit of bench grinder work just to knock down the worst of the pointy stuff, and then hand file work to radius the edges. I very much want to caution you, after doing the grinder and the cutting on these pieces, do that before you go to further steps. take everything sharp off of these. It's very important. It's very important for your safety. Now this little pie wedge one, I will end up cutting that down to a flat, but I haven't decided exactly how I'm going to design the handle for it, so I'm going to leave all of my material in it at this point. These asymmetrical ulu designs, I will drill holes, but again, I haven't decided exactly how I'm going to design the handles for all of these, so I'm going to let those go at this point as well. The process for working on these will be the same as the process for working on these smaller ones, which I'm going to take the rest of the way through for this video. So these little guys that I'm affectionately calling the Shulus, I have gone ahead and drilled pinholes, and what I use for pin stock in my knife making are little pieces cut from copper grounding rod wire, right? And so that's how I have sized the hole to accommodate these little fellows, okay? Whatever your pin stock is, that's the right size for the hole. And these are just going to get simple handles that are comfortable to hold in your palm like this and use as a skinning blade. That's the design intention behind this shape of knife. So what I like to do to make the bevels on these is to clamp it to a board and then just take a file and cut it in. Now, I don't use any kind of angle gauge on this. I've just done enough knife work and enough knife sharpening that I can just kind of feel that 25 or so degree angle that I want for a sharp slicing tool. And these want to be like a razor edge slicing tool for cutting leather, doing sewing work, and skinning game, right? So this is not a tool that I intend to be a beater or that I need to have a dull edge on for scraping. This is a slicing tool. So I'm going for a sharp edge. And, you know, I've just done enough I can feel it. And that's part of the process of learning these skills, is practicing getting that muscle memory in so that you can do the same. I am going to leave a little bit of bluntness. So I'm not going to take it all the way to a perfectly acute edge at this point. I'm going to take it out to the right bevel, but leave a little bit of a flat right along the edge because we still have to harden them. And there will be a little bit of decarburization that we need to grind through after the hardening process. So that's all that needs done for these yet, is shaping that edge. These larger ones, I'm not sure how well it's going to pick up. If I put them together, you'll see it. There you go. There's a lot of bowing along the edges of these, and that's going to make grinding the edge on these very difficult. So I am going to heat these and flatten them when I do the heat treat on the little Shulus. We are normalizing and getting ready to quench some of these little ulu blades in, again, exactly the same way that we did in the Forging Without a Forge video. They've been cooking here in this little fire and are about ready to pull out. I also have the larger ones in here, and we'll give them a little bit of light flattening when they are ready. Can you see here? That all went well. So the 3 smallest blades have been quenched and then tempered. I tempered them in an oven just at 480 kitchen oven for a half hour, right? That's the standard way I like to temper my tools. And, a half hour at 480 is perfectly attainable in anybody's kitchen oven. And it's much more reliable and easier to do than the hold it over the flame and watch the colors run trick. I have done that. I've done that before even on the channel. And last time I wanted to do some tempering, the oven was out. So I did that. So I do it both ways, but I prefer to just put them in the oven. So yeah, about 475, 480, and we have nice tempering colors on these. Now, something interesting that happened is, even though I brought these all the way up to critical temperature and did file test them before tempering, and they got hard, okay? They did not form a large amount of flaky scale, which is interesting, and that says that indeed this saw blade also has quite a lot of nickel or chromium, or probably both, in it. So it's passivating. It's got a passivating surface rather than a surface which is forming lots of flaking oxides, and that's good. So we're going to leave that oxide coating on the main body of the blank, okay, because that will help prevent further rust, because it's not stainless steel. And I mean, obviously the edge will be shiny. We also took these guys and straightened out all the edges so they're ready to file. But I'm not going to finish these right now in this video. Need to get this video out. There's a lot of work in finishing all of those. But I do want to get 2 of these smaller blades done, because they're going to be components of a future project. My design concept for these is to have them be a permanent part of a hunting pouch, a possibles bag. And I'll make a little sheath for them to go in that's just mounted on the sidewall of the bag. So one for me, one for Renee. This is going to be mine. This is Renee's. And you can see what we're going for with the handle. It's just a small nubbin of wood that won't be large and in the way in the bag, but is comfortable, to hold, so we can use that as a skinner. Hold it with a pinch grip for, chopping kitchen work, or even, holding it like that if you want to do like cutting fur, cutting leather, something like that, if you want to do a little detail work. So it's enough of a nubbin of wood that you can hold it in any way that you would realistically hold and work with in Ulu, but it's as small as possible to accommodate being part of a bag. Now, this is the same construction method that I do with hidden tang knives, and I've done a whole video on that before, link at the top of the screen. So I'm going to kind of show you some stages here, since I have both of these at different stages of completion, but I'm not going to film all of it since we've already done that on the channel before. So what I like to do with a hidden tang system is to chisel the whole recess out of 1/2. Okay, so that's flush on both edges. And then I take the original block and cut it asymmetrically. So I have about 1/3 on one side and 2/3 on the other. Okay, so this side has no inletting, but when I put it back on top, it matches perfectly, and that's the thing, that's the construction. Now, I prefer to take the blade and epoxy it like that, clamp that together right where my thumb and middle finger are, and then run the holes through after it's glued in place. On this one, I marked and drilled those holes out because in order to shape this big block of wood to something which looks like that, I need to have this out of there so I can do all of those complex curves. And indeed, this one is also not glued up yet. So I drilled the holes here. I am going to tonight glue and clamp that, so that'll be hardened in the morning, and then I'll still carry those holes through as its own step. Then I can shape this, and that's just a combination of sandpaper, sanding devices, and rasps. And you can see I've got basically every file and rasp I own out at the moment. So you just shape it until it fits your hand. However you like it is right. Okay. I like this sort of, for a small palm grip blade, I like this kind of, peanut inspired, we'll say, kind of outline. It just fits well. It's ergonomic, right? To just hold that kind of construction, that kind of shape. So this one will also be sort of a peanut inspired final design. I'm going to do all of that off camera, but I will make sure that we show you the results. Also, this is, almost forgot, the wood that we're using here, this is some of the artificial bog oak that I also made a couple years ago on the channel. Also, link available. Okay, so we have 2 finished skinning blades and a pile of future projects. So I wanted to show you the color on these handles. So there's 1 coat of linseed oil on here. There will be a little bit more and some paste wax, so that these are fully sealed, especially with their intended purpose not being a wood carving blade like most of the stuff I've made on the channel, but a food processing blade, right? You want that handle to be fully sealed so it doesn't absorb nastiness. Now this one I wanted to mention, the tang is a little wider than the first one, okay? And that was just a little bit uncomfortable when I would try to put my finger in there, okay? So I just took a file and ate out a little bit of that, because while this is edge hardened, about where my finger is hardened, okay? And above that is still soft enough to file on. You want that. You don't want the tangs of these things to be fully hardened. A, because they're brittle, but B, so that you can modify holes for pins and do things like this and those last minute alterations. So you really want, when you're quenching these things, to dip the edge, get that cool, and then once you lose the red color in the tang, then go all the way in and get the whole thing cooled. Okay? But you want that differential hardening across the blade. That's your ideal quench. So we were able to modify this and get a nice comfortable finger groove, so you can hold it and skin your deer. So there you go. Now if you're interested in these, the pattern for how to cut these out of the 10-inch saw blade is up on the Patreon. We are so grateful for everybody there. It helps us support the channel. But either way, I hope that you've enjoyed this little project and that you'll join us here next time at Old Ways Rising Farm.